Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Alicia McKay Show on today, Friday, the something of April, the 22nd of April. I've completely lost track of what day it is and what time it is, but I'll get to that in a minute. The main thing I want to point out today, as I'm coming live to you this morning, wherever you are, hopefully still at home, is that I've got this blank wall behind me, and it's really bothering me. And I've been on a bit of a journey the last week and a half because I went into isolation with my kids because my teenager got COVID, which is fine. And so one of the things that we did when we weren't sort of sure what to do with the days is we binge watched that Get Organised show on Netflix. So if you have also binge watched that show and you are willing to admit to that publicly, you should absolutely put that in the comments. But anyway, I went and watched the show, and then I thought, well, I can't possibly keep my lounge in the same arrangement that it's in right now. Like, I have to reorganize everything because, I'm a bit like that. So I reorganized the lounge, and I've been putting things up and putting things down, and I've been moving bookcases around. And you see this particular one? Do you see the color coding? I'm quite excited about this. You see the books are all presented in color sections. You can thank those two women off the organising show for that. Anyway, I've been doing all of these things and putting pictures up on the wall and taking them down. And so I decided to give my office a bit of this treatment and move things around. And so I took everything off the wall and I went to put a different arrangement of pictures up on the wall, and I've lost my hammer. This is just a really long intro to me telling you that I'm feeling sad this morning because I've lost my hammer. It's a good hammer. My ex-husband is a builder, and one of the things he gave me when we split up in the divorce was a good hammer. He's like, you're going to need this. And he's right. I love my hammer, and I can't find it. Who loses their hammer? I'm shit about that. Anyway, time is weird. It's I think, looking at my employed friends and the way that they've managed their workload in the last week, this seems to be this year the kind of Jesus died and came back equivalent of the Christmas to New Year's haze, where because Easter was close enough to Anzac Day this year, people have realised that if they very strategically deploy some of their annual leave days in amongst the statutory holidays, you can get a week and a half off for 3 or 4 annual leave days. So there aren't very many people, as far as I can tell, who are actively engaged in their work this week. And I've also lived in a bit of a haze about time this week, and I'm really actually hoping that there are enough of my clients and friends who are taking that leave and taking that break that they didn't notice that I haven't responded to them at all. Because after a week in isolation, interestingly, I've now put myself into isolation this week, basically. I spent a week and a half playing housekeeper and mum and chef and maid and organise the lounge around her and make 10 snacks a day and clean up and tidy up. And when everybody finally left and they could leave again, I was like, well, great, I'm not going anywhere. Like, I can go somewhere now and I'm not going to. And I've been at home with a couple of exceptions for the last 4 days, talking to no one. And it has been glorious. So I guess maybe that's just a really long-winded way of saying that if I haven't replied to your email or your text, sorry about that. But hopefully you're on leave anyway. And I see in the comments that there are a few excited people who haven't taken their annual leave days and instead have gone to work and have been really enjoying your absence, everyone. So yeah, love that, into that. But this leads me into a bit of a rant, actually. Cam, can you give me a rant intro? So my rant this week isn't a super certain one because I'm not actually totally sure where I land on this. But I think we overvalue work in our lives fundamentally. And I'm using the royal we here because I definitely overvalue work in my life. But like, when did we start using work as the outlet for everything? I had a client this week. So one thing I did do this week was I ran a workshop and it was really good. That's the only thing I've really managed to do this week. And we were talking about authenticity, which was great. And there was this really great question posed by one of the people in the group. And she goes, yeah, but I mean, how much of work is for self-development? Like, should we be doing personal growth at work? Is that what we're here for? Because I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't, but I'm not sure that that's the job of this place. And that's quite an unpopular opinion these days. But I reckon she's onto something. And I'm not sure when we decided as a LinkedIn community, and let me be very clear, I'm speaking from the tiny little privileged bubble that is people that follow Alicia McKay on LinkedIn, that work was this outlet where we could develop personally and learn all the skills we need in life. Like I know we spend a lot of time there, most of us. So I can see that. Oh, okay. Can you not hear me? Can you not hear me, Cam? Is that close enough? Yeah. Like I know we spend a lot of time there, and therefore it makes sense to put things there. But work is just a tiny component of our lives, and the people that it serves for us to use work as our primary outlet of self-expression and meaning finding is not us. You know, like I don't want to get all like Marxist communist on it, but we're not the one that own the outputs of our labor most of the time. And so if we decide to use work as our primary channel of self-expression and time usage, then like I don't know, who's that for? Oh, see, I told you this was an uncertain rant. I got halfway through it and I'm like, oh, I really love work. I don't know how I feel about it. Cam, cold throw, as someone who also is not employed in a traditional job, do we overvalue work?
I think work provides something for a lot of people that they don't get in other places because of how separated and isolated our lives have become. And the experience of moving to a new city and not having the social network that I had in Melbourne, work is one of the ways that you do that. And I found it really difficult because, as you just said, I don't have a normal job. So the ways that you usually find social connection are basically by repetitively spending time with people. And becoming friends with someone requires an investment of a whole lot of hours before you get a lot of value from the friendship. And as a kid or a teenager or a uni student, you don't recognize that. As an adult moving to a new city, you definitely do. And so I think the value that work provides for a lot of people is a really like low effort, low input required way to fill your life with meaning, substance, and people to hang out with.
Okay, that's a much better response than I was expecting. That is great. And also very on brand that your response would immediately be related to like, how can I get friends out of this? Which I think is great. If you want,
well, like I think to follow that up, I think it depends on how you like to validate yourself. What are the things that you find valuable? And for a lot of people, doing meaningful work is super, super important. And for other people who have different priorities, well, maybe socializing is higher on the agenda, or the sense of community or belonging that some of us might crave.
Other people. One of the advantages, though, to having clients, I would have thought, and not having to work with the same people all the time, is that you've got like a bigger pool. You know, like if you work at a normal job, you've only got the 6 people that are in your team that you hang out with. If you've got clients and you're going from place to place, you can meet 100 people in a year rather than 6.
That is definitely true, but you need to spend a certain number of hours to solidify the friendship. And so I think what a lot of people, including myself, didn't realize a whole bunch during like the university years and spending basically all your free time hanging out with your mates is the number of hours required to solidify a friendship to the point that it becomes really valuable. And I was chatting about this to Trish Trainer, I think the other day, a client of yours who I was interviewing. And she was saying she'd read a book that said you have to spend 200 hours with someone before the friendship becomes valuable. Now, when you're a carefree student with nothing better to do, you spend 3 or 4 nights a week hanging out with your mates. So you rack up those 200 hours really, really quickly. When you're working and busy and have a separate life that might involve kids or other things, it takes a long time to spend 200 hours with someone. And if that's what it takes to solidify a friendship, if you only see a client every now and then, you're not going to be friends with them for a year.
Okay, this is explaining to me this theory really quickly, why I don't have any friends, and that the only friends I do have are ones I've had for 20 years, because I was not a carefree uni student who was out 3 or 4 nights a week. I had kids from 16. And so I've only had a limited amount of time to spend with people. And if I think about it, my best mates in the whole world are ones I've known since I was between 14 and 16 years old. And that all of a sudden makes a lot of sense. But like more broadly, I guess my point is that that's the problem, isn't it? Like work has taken up so much space in our lives that we are using it for a whole bunch of other purposes, like finding meaning and contribution in the world, forming social connections. And that's not what its job is. And so I'm not really strong on this one. You know, I'm a strong opinion held lightly kind of a person. I think, you know, I'm also a workaholic, so I've got to be a bit careful with this. But maybe the point is that if we're using work for all of these other kind of reasons, that actually we should just do the work bit, which is probably only like 15 hours a week, she says from the privilege of a knowledge job, and put it over there. And then you've got lots of free time to go and actually source friends and hobbies and sense of meaning and contribution that might be slightly more fulfilling. Because what are the odds that the people you most want to be mates with also happen to like work at your work or do the similar job to you? Like if you're an accountant, maybe you don't want to be friends with other accountants. Maybe you hate accountants.
Well, drifting into the range of just social isolation generally and how backyards have fences and people don't even know their neighbours anymore. My brother lives in a house that's pretty much a commune, and I find that a far more appealing prospect than living in a place where you don't know your neighbours and don't have anyone immediately around you that you don't live with. I find that a really odd thing that Western cultures slid into. And if you chat to someone from an Eastern culture or possibly an Asian culture and they ask you about what you do with your parents when they get old, they are mortified. The idea of not spending your later years being looked after by your kids is absolutely appalling to them. And that's just a completely normal, accepted thing in our Western society. And I think it just points to an isolation more generally that I, for one, am not a fan of. So this is becoming my rant because I'm really upset about this. I've moved to a new city and I'm a really social person. And I find it really hard to make friends here because our society is set up in a way that isn't conducive to building those strong, healthy friendships with people. We're focused way too much on spending too much time at work. And we don't get the social community nourishment that humans crave. We're social animals.
Yeah, speak for yourself. I'm glad no one's here this week. I hate other people. And on that note, Cam, what have you got for us this week?
When I was a kid, we had a family dinner ritual, which was quite important. And this is very standard for a lot of families, I think. Your time spent together as a family over the dinner table is a really important ritual that matters a lot. And that's certainly the case with our little family here and for probably most people listening. Some people do it at breakfast time, which I find odd. Anyway, my mum would ring a little bell when it was time to come to the dinner table, and we'd all troop in from wherever we were around the house or outside, and we'd sit down and have dinner together. It was a really nice time to bond. And one night we were doing that, and suddenly someone started playing the piano in the living room. And I remember Mum doing a quick head count for the number of kids in the house, and we didn't have any visitors, so we didn't know who was playing the piano. We had an open fire in our lounge room, and it turns out that a possum had fallen down the chimney and wandered over and landed on the piano and had started playing it. And you can imagine that a possum isn't particularly melodically inclined, but it did work out that it enjoyed making the noise. So this possum was walking up and down the keyboard on the piano, making a cacophonous noise and enjoying that it could make a sound. Now, I mention this because last night I went to a gig at Meow in Wellington, a lovely live music venue, and heard a concert that was not completely dissimilar to that experience. The woman who was playing was basically just jumping down on the keyboard. At one point, she was elbowing it as she theatrically wrestled it like you might an angry bag of squirrels. She was supported by two percussion drummists. I think that's what they called themselves. And between the three of them, it was a little bit like when you're behind three cars turning left at an intersection and the indicators in front are blinking out of sequence for a while. Then every now and then the phase of them brings them in, and so that they're lined up. And that's what it felt like. It felt like three musicians who were basically siblings fighting for attention, creating louder and louder noises and just weaving in and out of sync with each other as they performed this concert. Now, the part about it that was amazing was that I was completely enraptured. And I think that's the beauty of a concert that you're not meant to understand. And the sound it was making was bizarre. So the percussionist, one of them sounded like he'd got one of those ballerina trinkets that you wind and make those pleasant lullabies, and attached it to a cordless drill and just cranked it to an absolutely absurd RPM and was bashing out noises at random. The other one, it was... if anyone ever played a game called Daley Thompson's Olympic Challenge, which I think was on a Commodore 64, the interface and graphics at the time didn't allow for much gameplay. So the thing they used to measure your ability was to see how quickly you could just bash two keys as fast as you possibly could. And it seemed like the second percussionist was playing Daley Thompson's Olympic Challenge. Now, this concert went for about an hour and a half. It was completely cacophonous, but the 100 people in the room were completely enraptured by it, as was I. So it was one of those bizarre moments of not understanding art in any way at all, but enjoying it very deeply. So yeah, I went to a live music show last night, linking it to the previous topic. I didn't talk to anybody. I did a crossword, and I enjoyed the show very, very much. So if anyone wants to check out live music at Meow in Wellington, it's an absolute mixed bag, but you're probably going to enjoy it. Back to you, Alicia.
Amazing. And in a world of parallels and everything else, I was doing something similar last night, which is actually that I was learning a new song on the guitar, and it sounded a bit like a possum jumping up and down across a piano, because while I am an enthusiastic guitarist, it could not be said that I am a talented one. All right, I want to talk about books because that's my favorite thing to talk about. Can you give me the little doofer? Oh, I do like that. It makes me feel really special. Okay, so I've read a lot of books this year, and on a side note, I think it's time that I start tracking all the books I'm reading, and I think I'm going to start doing that publicly. So if anyone has any interest in following along with what I've read and like a 2-line review on it, then I might start doing that and putting it out there, because I do read in excess of 100 books a year. So it's a mixed bag, but it might be an interesting thing. So if you're keen on that, do let me know, and I will start doing that publicly, because I'm often frustrated at how I don't keep very good track of all the books I've read. But this week, 2 of the books that I've read this week, I think are really interesting because they're a little fight. I've got a little paradox in front of me of the 2, and I read them one after the other. So I think this is quite good. So the first one I read was The Gap and the Gain, which is a book by Dan Sullivan, the strategic coach guy, and Benjamin Hardy, who does some really interesting work around psychology and organizational development. And he's a super clever dude, and he has a cool YouTube channel. So you should go and see him. He's cool. He's a little bit like American positive thinking, but anyway, he's fine. So this book's quite good. And while it's not talking about the power of positive thinking, it's not far off. So it's kind of saying that when you are a person who is really focused on achieving something new and trying to get somewhere, it's really easy to focus on the gap between where you are now and where you want to get to. And it's kind of a game you can never win, because every time you assess your progress, you're like, well, I've still got a way to go. And if you are a high achiever, you're probably prone to focusing on what you haven't managed yet and not adequately celebrating your successes to that point. So the idea behind this book is that when you are faced with a choice between living in the gap and focusing on what you haven't achieved yet, you actually wind up achieving more if you measure your success backwards, and you're instead able to be really clear on the progress that you've made and use that as motivation to continue to move forward. So it's a great idea. It's really good, and it's expressed really well. There's a lot of focus on how continually tracking and having gratitude for your progress and achievements creates a momentum that continues to develop that. And so every day you should write down the 3 things that were your wins for the day or your gains for the day. And that every time you approach a challenging situation in your day, you choose whether to approach it from the gap and focus on what's missing, or focus on the gain. So this is one perspective. Now, there's a lot I like about it, and there's a bunch that I don't, because I have some real skepticism about the kind of social toxicity of positive thinking, and how encouraging people to just look on the bright side all the time is actually kind of shit and also untrue. So then the book I read after that is Dan Pink's new book. And Dan Pink, honestly, when I read this man's books, I'm filled with a sense of needing to write immediately and feeling extremely inferior. He is such a good writer. Like, in a world of nonfiction and business books, he writes so clearly and so beautifully, and I just cry about it. But anyway, I'm a nerd. So this book is called The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. And it's kind of a bit same, but different. So Gap in the Gain says, look at the great stuff that's happened and use that to achieve more in your life. Power of Regret says, look at where you fucked up and that'll make you better. And so what's really cool about this book is that Dan Pink has done some really good longitudinal qualitative and quantitative research on the role that regret plays in our lives, and that actually we've got this really toxic and dangerous no regrets #culture that's completely untrue and unhelpful, because regret plays a really important role in our lives, and that we use that as information for what we need to do differently and how to reflect differently on where we've been in our lives, and that actually we should have a bunch of regrets, and that's really healthy and normal. And so these two books kind of butted up against each other in my brain, because I read them both in the space of about 2 days. And I'm still mulling over it, really. Like, they're both worth a read. So first of all, if you're like, oh, Alicia, just tell me if I should read them. Yes, you should, particularly the Dan Pink one. This one, The Gap in the Gain, uses too much capitalization unnecessarily, and that really upsets me as a person. The Power of Regret is extremely good. And what I love about Dan Pink is he just picks a topic, becomes an expert on it, and then writes the best book you've read about it. So he's like, I want to know about regret. So he just learns everything there is to know about regret, spends 3 years immersed in it, writes the best book out there on it. But before that, he's written about motivation and change and sales and time. Can you tell I've got a fan situation going on? Anyway, it is worth a read. And if you do read it, I'd be really interested in all of your reflections and thoughts about whether we should be regretting things that have happened in our lives, whether we should be focusing on the positive. I don't come down one way or the other. Like, I've got space for both of these thoughts in my brain. What I do think is interesting is, I guess, this kind of meaning seeking that we just cannot help but have. And that as people, we can't just have experiences, can we? Like, we can't just do stuff and then move on. The existence of these two books is such a testament to what meaning-seeking animals we are, which I think is a Clifford Geertz quote, who is an awesome anthropologist and also worth reading, where we have to create a narrative and a story about our experiences in our minds. We can't just have the experience. It's a very human impulse, and some of us more than others. Like, I ranted when I came on here about how I couldn't find my hammer, and I was just thinking just now about the process I'd been on in my mind, where yesterday I had a new print turn up that I've ordered from an amazing artist, and I'm looking forward to sharing that. And my brain was like, see, that's why you couldn't find your hammer, because you were supposed to put that new picture up there. Like, come on, there's no fatalism involved in this. I just couldn't find my bloody hammer. But this is what our brains do. They search for justification and meaning in a way to make sense of the world. So whether you make sense in a positive fashion or in a negative fashion, I do have books that will fit that purpose for you. So I've got a great comment here in the chat. Are they mutually exclusive? Like, can we not celebrate growth and learn from what we've done? I mean, yeah, probably. I'm not the expert here. And I swing between kind of this like nihilism where I'm like, nothing matters. Everything's a waste of time. Why are we trying to make people feel positive? And my own version of toxic positivity, which I guess is more a stoic version, which is like, well, shit's happening anyway. If you get to pick your own story, it may as well be a good one. On a side note, before I move on from this segment, inspired by Cam's brother Cole, I've started keeping a 5-year diary. And so I've bought this beautiful Lecterm 5-year diary, and you don't have to buy a beautiful Lecterm one. I'm just a stationery nerd. And it's got, each day of the year, and it's got 5 spaces on each page. And so every day you fill in a few lines from what happened that day. And then once you get to the end of the year and you start again, you get to see what you wrote last year, and so on and so forth for 5 years. And my last 3 days, I'm already disappointed in myself. Like, I'm already disappointed that next year I'm going to read those and be like, wow, did that really matter, Alicia? Was that a good use of your time to just go down a work funnel and not talk to anybody for 3 days? Do you feel good about yourself? No. Future me already doesn't feel good about myself. And I thought that I actually wrote in my entry last night, I'm not looking forward to reading back on this one. So, yeah.
I think one of the really interesting things you can do on that front is how many individual days can you remember from last year? If you had to write down the number of days where something interesting enough happened that you could specifically remember it, how many would there be? And the figure is often alarmingly low.
Wow, I've got a book now, and it is also worth, before I introduce the incredible Callum Valentine, honouring Cam in this conversation, because I bought this 5 lines a day 5-year diary, and I had it sitting next to my bed for probably 2 months, and I couldn't start it yet because I knew that once I started it, like, you have to do it every day for 5 years. And so I just couldn't find myself to quite start it yet. Cam picks it up one day, starts writing in it. He's like, let's do today's. And I just about threw the bloody thing at his head because I was like, thanks very much, Cam. Like, you've just gifted me 1,500 evenings of obligation because of this impulsive action that you've taken. Like, do you know what you've done?
But you do remember that day now.
Yeah, and it's in the thing. So look at that. All right. I don't know what's going on in the world, and what's good about that is that I don't need to, because I'm friends with the magnificent Callum Valentine, who keeps me updated with his hot takes on what's happening out there in the world so that I don't have to know. And now, you're welcome, everybody. He can do this for you. Could we welcome CV to the show, please?
Hello. Morning. I'll start with I'll add to Cam's sort of noise rock rant there with my own experience, which is I used to manage a music venue in Dunedin, in Port Chalmers, which is a sort of half wharfy, half charmingly artistic weirdos part of New Zealand, and it was an amazing place to be involved in a music venue. And at one stage they hosted a noise rock festival called the Lines of Flight, which, yeah, it was quite an impressive 3 days to be working a bar on. I mean, noise rock is not my thing. I don't really understand it, and I'm a huge music fan. And it's kind of, to me, it's more of an art project than it is a musical enterprise.
So is this a genre, CV? Is noise rock a genre?
Yeah, noise rock, or you can go even further into white noise. If you want to have a sample of some, my uncle actually is the drummer in a one of the most famous white noise bands. They're called the Dead Sea.
Writing that down.
Yeah, write that down.
Write that down immediately.
And I don't think anyone in the band would be offended by me saying that most regular civilian listeners will last maybe 3 or 5 minutes into a Dead Sea track, but before they kind of run away screaming. And that's kind of the point. It's this very punk rock exercise. But my favorite moment...
Sorry, Callum, just to jump in there, a civilian listener. I love the idea that listeners have to be segregated into levels of qualification to enjoy the music. That's beautiful.
Well, 3 minutes into a Dead Sea track, you'll see exactly what I mean. But the best moment from Lines of Flight was one of the performances. So I was working bar over this 3-day period, and one of the performances came up very solemnly and asked me if I could please turn off the dishwasher because it was disrupting the carefully orchestrated performance. Which I will always remember that moment as just something where it was two human beings who don't really understand each other and are coming at the world from very different eras. Where, I mean, I can understand it in a way because his performance was very much could be altered by the sound of a dishwasher because it was very similar. So I can understand if you've carefully planned out your performance. I mean, at one stage, this was at a different event, but somebody played an electronic rake that they had rigged up to be able to play the building. That was actually pretty spectacular, and I genuinely enjoyed that one.
Following on, CV, there was one of the instruments that was being played last night appeared to be just a bunch of pieces of metal hammered into a piece of wood. And the method of playing it seemed to be that you just picked it up off the ground and just dropped it on your bench a few times. And while this was happening, another sound came in, which surprised me because there was something different about the timbre of the note. And it turned out that it was what I think was a comfort dog in the audience, whining in sympathy for the noise. And at the time, because of the nature of the music, as you describe, it's quite hypnotic and drony. And while I was sitting there watching, my mind was on a journey back to my childhood, thinking of the possums on the piano. And so the trip that you go on during this kind of performance is so disconnected sometimes from the present that you're in that it's quite hard to work out what's the performance, what's the instrument, and what isn't. And that was certainly the case for me.
Yeah, and I just want to get behind Dishwasher Guy and be like, I'm a woman that will listen to extremely loud heavy metal music quite happily and go about my day and work out and do what needs to be done. But if there's a ticking clock in the room or a dripping tap or two people speak at once, to me, I have a complete audio-inspired mental shutdown. So I'm all for Dishwasher Guy.
Yeah, I mean, the point is that you've carefully planned out how you want the room to sound, and it's your performance that you're giving to people, and you don't want anything to mess with that. And I don't want this to come across like I'm anti noise music at all. I think it's a fantastic form of artistic expression. To me, it's not something I'm personally into, but more power to you. It's fantastic. You go on a very different journey with sitting there listening to something like that's very discordant, that's so far out on the fringes of kind of that punk ethos that it becomes something else entirely. It's amazing.
And the experience I had last night was that the room was enraptured, and part of the appeal for me was how much attention other people were paying. You could hear a pin drop in the room when the performance got to a quiet stage, and at the end of it, there was rapturous applause. The audience absolutely loved it. And because I'm not a fan of that genre and haven't really been to all of those performances, I had no idea that they were appreciating it that much. At one point, it looked like the pianist, who was literally elbowing the keys, started doing it so aggressively that the audience was hooping and hollering like they were at a WWE event. It was a completely different kind of performance in music than I was used to, and it was surprising and delightful in equal measure.
Excellent. Well, that's my intro. What I really wanted to talk about was the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case, which has just been unavoidable this week. And my reflection on it is not to have any kind of take or anything. It's just that we probably shouldn't be hearing this. Like that's my overall sense. Like there's so many just intimate details that do not need to be in a courtroom, and due to the nature of celebrity, it's just all coming out. I read there's a press release from Court TV who are very excited about this whole thing because, I mean, my first question seeing this footage on the news was, why are there cameras in this courtroom? We don't normally see live camera footage from courtrooms. And yeah, Court TV managed to get the rights. They syndicate out the pool footage to anyone that wants it. And it means that you have this. I mean, my reaction to it, because I'm somebody who needs to know more, unfortunately, as discussed on this show before. But because of the sort of bite-sized nature of news now, you get these bizarre stories about one aspect of somebody's marriage coming out of it, and it's just bizarre. Like, I read a piece in The Independent that was 500 words on Johnny Depp, a photo of him passed out with ice cream spilling on his jeans that Amber Heard took, and him saying that this was an example of her making fun of him, and after he was passed out on opioids. And it's just, overall, you have to take a step back and say we should not be turning the lens of public attention on this.
Filling in the viewers, including me, who don't know what's happening here, is this a divorce case that we're hearing, or
this is a defamation case? So Johnny Depp is suing Amber Heard for, I think it's 50 million, for a piece that she wrote in the New Yorker, not explicitly naming him as an abuser, but definitely indicating that. And his case is that, first of all, that wasn't true, and secondly, that his career has been ruined by this. And so we have extensive public cross-examination of both of them now, which is why we're seeing a million stories about it.
Irony, where the case is that personal details were shared publicly and that that's a problem, and that the process of challenging that is a public interrogation of so much more of your private life than you could ever have imagined.
And also that Johnny Depp has no longer appeared in films, and in order to rectify this, he's cast himself in a reality drama inadvertently. That is being aired. I'm going to stop reading stuff about it now, I think, because it's just too much. I haven't seen
anything about it, which is why I need you, right? Like, I didn't even know this was going on. I did know that Amber Heard was with Elon Musk at one point, though, because I went on a rabbit hole down Elon Musk's private life the other day, and I can't remember why. It might have been you talking about Grimes, because you're such a Grimes fan, and I was like, what is the story with Grimes and Elon Musk? They just had another baby. And then I went and discovered his bizarre, sordid private life, and then was kind of like cheered on by the fact that if you're a clever person, your relationships are probably a bit fucked, and I just felt quite good about that. That was what I got out of it.
Well, bridging back to one of my historical rants again, a sort of similar exercise in things that should have never happened ideally and should not have happened publicly. In 1926, a very successful single lawyer with no relatives, who had amassed quite a fortune due to his penchant for investments, died. So he keeled over, died. His will was read. In the will, he basically declared that he was trying to be the biggest legal troll in world history. So he left shares in an alcohol company to an anti-prohibition or a prohibition group, if they were allowed to keep the funds if they were actively involved personally in the distribution of the alcohol. He left a holiday home in Jamaica to 3 lawyers who absolutely hated each other on the condition that they lived there together. But the most effect that he had on the world from his will was starting something which was later dubbed by the press the Great Stork Derby. So he specified that the remainder of his fortune would go to the woman who gave birth to the most babies within a decade period, starting the day of his death. And that's a strange and bizarre piece of history.
Fuck, I'm so here for this, by the way. Like, why get rich if you can't fuck with people from the grave? This is so good.
But like most exercises that to somebody is a little hilarious prank, it got darker and darker and darker, as of course it did. So possibly making it worse was the fact that this wasn't publicized for around 6 years after his death. So the immediate front runners were people that had just had the most babies anyway, and they tended to be from very poor, unprivileged working class backgrounds. And it was, once the sort of will clause came to light, these people were thrust into the spotlight. Not unlike what we've seen in court this week. And yeah, it wasn't very pretty. The conditions in which a lot of them lived meant that a lot of the children didn't survive.
Do you have a number for a CV? Is there a figure that the winner was able to achieve?
The winners were tied on 11, but what happened was the people that had been the front runners in the press and that had been subject to all this attention and had their lives forensically examined, there was no rule set over whether these children had to be legitimate. And you can imagine in the 20s, that was a huge social story. I mean, it was the 30s by this point, but things still weren't particularly progressive. And what ended up happening, which will appeal to your deep sense of class war, Alicia McKay, is that the sort of working class women who were going for this title to make their lives better for their many, many children were eventually muscled out by middle class women who could afford to hire lawyers to challenge the will. And it was eventually shared by sort of, I think it was 3 or 4 people. So the major legal battle was about whether legitimate, as in a product of a marriage, babies were the only ones that could be counted. Or
was there a condition that the babies all had to survive?
Well, this was one of the points of intrigue, was that all of the newspaper articles were written in a kind of racing language rather than actually reflecting on the conditions that led to these children not surviving.
This is a very cold throw CV, but I'd love to hear, if you can, you think a simulated call in the final months of the race to have the most number of babies in a decade. What kind of commentary would that be?
I mean, yeah, it's the whole thing. I just find the more I read about it, the darker it gets, just in terms of, this is the Hunger Games. And nobody knows his original intention with leaving this will. He was a legal scholar with a sort of twisted, trollish sense of humor. One of his main hobbies was leaving dollar bills on the side of the road and watching people pick them up, because his famous quote was, "Every man has a price." And it's you're sort of proto-capitalist, incredibly philosophy having a very awful impact on people's lives. That's the great Stork Derby.
But gap in the gain. What if, out of all those massive number of babies that got born, and I'd be interested in knowing how many got born as a result of that, but you probably can't exactly track that, how many went on to do wonderful things in the world? And were it not for this sicko and his twisted sense of fuckery, we wouldn't even have them as people.
Yeah, well, part of the interview process as we went along was they would all say, well, I would have had this child anyway. But that was, of course, sort of part of the social code, and everything we know about desperation and motivation tells you otherwise.
Oh, yeah, and just how many kids happen on purpose. Like, very few kids happen on purpose. I'm enjoying how much of this...
Sorry for interrupting that. I'm just enjoying how much of this story went from being a delightful rejoicement of absurdity into a fairly grim reflection on what has turned into Squid Games, basically. But I thought this would be a challenge for Alicia to bring back into a positive frame of reference to spin it into the home stretch of this show. Alicia, bring it home.
Yeah, thrust us home.
Can you not use the word thrust on a live stream, please? Because I'm not mature enough to handle this.
So this I have learned this week.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again on the Alicia McKay Show on this beautiful Friday morning. We've had an excellent coverage of topics today, ranging from the bizarre nature of time, whether or not work actually matters, toxic positivity, whether we should look backwards or forwards, possums and elbows, bashing pianos, an electric rake, a lot of babies, and Johnny Depp, who cannot help himself but to pass out in a puddle of ice cream. I loved it. Quite frankly, what a chat.